You've heard of hidden gems? Now get ready for hidden rupees. Introducing a whole new series of top 10 hidden PS Vita games. That's pretty much like every other single top 10 video you've seen on YouTube for the last couple of years. Enjoy. Number 5. The Wolf Among Us. Talk about being on the edge of your seat. Graphic adventure games don't get any better than this. If you're a fan of The Walking Dead from Telltale Games, then you'll absolutely love The Wolf Among Us. Within the first 10 to 15 minutes, I was hooked. The story is so damn good. Although you don't really do much in the game other than walk around and gather clues, you feel a strong sense of involvement with the characters around you. It's almost as if the wrong answer can somehow have an adverse effect on how the story unfolds. Now that's powerful storytelling. Just when I think I have an idea of what's going on, the game does a 180 and takes me by complete surprise. The game starts off like a murder mystery. Someone's been killed, and it's up to you as sheriff to figure out who did it. Right from the start, the game's use of light and shadow combined with the neon night colors does a good job at drawing you into the story. I could tell as soon as the game started I was in for something special. I'm not familiar with the comic book the game is based on, so instead of me attempting to explain the origins or who the characters are, I'm just not even gonna try. Just know that if you're a fan of graphic adventure games, then The Wolf Among Us is where it's at. Unfortunately, as great as the story is, the port over to the PS Vita isn't as graceful. Quite frankly, the game runs pretty awful. Scenes with dialogue isn't too bad, but anything involving jerky motion, for example a fight scene, will have the whole thing look like a rushed port job. The long load times and audio distortion doesn't help either. Too many times I would hear my speakers pop for no apparent reason. But other than the performance issues I just mentioned, the game looks great overall. The environments are colorful and the characters all have a distinct look and personality. Although it's unfortunate the PS Vita port couldn't have turned out better, I don't think it's enough for me not to recommend this game. I'm willing to overlook the performance issues since this isn't really the kind of game that relies heavily on action set pieces. Telltale Games are truly a master at their craft. It's a shame they had to close down because I can only imagine what other great stories they could have told. Number 4. Soltner X2 Final Prototype. Having played the original on the PS3, I was a little scared going into the second. I mean, the first game did not leave a very good impression. From what I remember, it was one of the most difficult side-scrolling shoot-'em-ups I had ever played. If I recall, I don't think I even made it past the second level. Fortunately, the difficulty has been toned down accordingly for the sequel. It's still tough, mind you, but at least now it feels like it's actually possible to clear the game. Soltner X2 shares a lot of similarities with its predecessor. First off, it's still crazy looking as ever. Tons of explosions, lights, and particle effects are flying every which way. It's almost hypnotic. Like the original, you have 3 weapons that you can switch between, and even to this day, I still don't understand how it all exactly works. I'm under the impression that if you switch back and forth too many times, the selected weapon becomes weaker. I don't know. Can someone in the comments explain this to me? What I do know is the game is a lot of fun to play, especially if you're a fan of classic shoot-'em-ups. The graphics are beautiful, the gameplay is challenging, and the music is out of this world. You definitely need to play this one with headphones on. My only complaint is the game is rather short, which isn't really surprising being that it's a shoot-'em-up. These games don't tend to run for very long, but that's the beauty of it. They're great to play in short bursts when you've got only a few minutes to spare. If you were scared off by the brutal difficulty of the original, have no fear. The developers got it right with this one. Number 3. Gravity Rush. You know, there's something breathtaking about jumping off the roof of a building and being caught up right before you hit the ground. No matter how many times I do it, it never gets old to me. If you're familiar with Peter Pan or Superman, you'll get an idea of what I'm talking about. In Gravity Rush, you control the character Kat, who's lost her memory and must use her gravity manipulating powers to get them back. The game takes place in an open world environment. You fly around, talk to people, and perform various objectives. The open world aspect alone is enough reason to be impressed, considering this is all running on a handheld. But the thing that struck me the most about this game was its overall presentation. Most notably, its comic book inspired cutscenes and musical score. They're so well integrated into the actual game that watching them makes you forget you're even playing a game. The visuals have this beautiful, hazy, almost dreamlike quality to them. It's definitely not your average looking action-adventure title. The audio is also a joy to listen to. It's lighthearted one moment and then gloomy the next. Even though there's this sort of whimsical charm that's apparent throughout the entire game, you can't help but shake this foreboding feeling that's always hanging in the background. The gameplay is fun for the most part. Whether you're fighting enemies on the ground or in the air, the controls perform well. My only complaint with the combat is that sometimes you can't lose track of where you are in space. Constantly changing your center of gravity, it can get a little confusing at times, especially when multiple enemies are attacking you from different planes. Also, I think it's way too easy to overshoot an attack when you're airborne. Still, those minor blemishes shouldn't distract you from one of the PS Vita's finest hidden rupees. Number 2. Flow. Oh boy, this game makes me so emotional. It's like every time I hear that intro, I'm instantly brought back to 2007. I remember it like it was yesterday. It's my 3rd year of college, and I'm the proud owner of the newly released PlayStation 3. I also remember being super excited for Tuesday nights because I knew that was when the PSN store would get its weekly update. Usually it would be a few gameplay trailers and maybe a demo, but I didn't care. There was a drought of PS3 games, so anything I could download onto the system made me happy. Then one day, a friend told me about this game called Flow. I'm not quite sure how to describe this game, and to be honest, I'm not even sure if I would even call it a game. It's actually closer to being art. You control what I assumed to be at the time some sort of jellyfish. I think the developers refer to it as an aquatic microorganism, but I'm just gonna stick with jellyfish. You float around and your goal is to basically eat everything on the screen. There's really not much else to it. The more you consume, the bigger your jellyfish becomes. Its simplicity combined with its beautiful soundtrack makes you think of life for some reason, which is only fitting that it was eventually brought over to the PS Vita. Get it? Vita? Life? Never mind. My attachment to this game isn't so much what I'm able to do in it, but rather the memories it brings back. We all have those games that reminds us of a particular time in our lives, and for me, this is one of those games. Being that it's on the PS Vita, I can experience that moment in time whenever I want. Number 1. Sly Cooper, Thieves in Time. I've been putting off this game for the longest time, simply because I didn't know how to cover it. Do I include it in a top 10 video, or should I dedicate an entire review to it? My conclusion was to just play the darn game and go from there. Now, I've heard about this franchise many times before, but it's one of those games I just never got around to playing, which is surprising since there's at least 3 of them on the PS2 and the HD Remastered collection on the PS3. But after spending some time with the 4th game in the series, I'm wishing I had taken the opportunity to check out these games a lot sooner. I'm just going to skip to the chase and say it right now. Sly Cooper, Thieves in Time is frickin' amazing. Playing this game reminds me of watching Saturday morning cartoons as a kid. It's wonderfully animated, cleverly written, and fun to play. The presentation is flat out gorgeous, reminiscent of recent Pixar films you might have seen. It has that sort of adventurous feel like the Uncharted games, except this time you're playing as a raccoon. You take control of Sly Cooper and his various companions as they travel back in time to repair the thievius raccoonus. For those unfamiliar with Sly Cooper lore, you're probably saying to yourself, WTF. Each level is laid out in a very condensed open world type setting. You're free to roam around collecting items scattered throughout. Each character has a set amount of missions, or jobs as they're called in this game, that are completed to help advance the story. The great thing about this game is how each job is expertly woven into the main narrative. Like, you never feel as if you're taking on a mission that has nothing to do with the main story. It's hard to categorize what kind of game Sly Cooper Thieves in Time is. At its heart, I would call it platforming, but underneath the exterior, it's so much more. Granted, it does do platforming very well. As a matter of fact, it has some of the most satisfying platforming sections I've played in quite a while. Aside from that, there seems to be a little bit of everything. Sneaking, driving, shooting, and even some reconnaissance. When everything starts to feel routine, the game throws a completely different gameplay mechanic at you, thanks in part to the various characters you control, as well as the different outfits you acquire. One of them allows you to reflect projectiles, while another one lets you break down barriers. Once all jobs are complete, you're greeted with a boss fight that not only looks amazing, but is fun to play out. As I mentioned earlier, the game is wonderfully animated. Aside from some pixelated full-motion video, the in-game cutscenes are Disney quality. The audio is equally impressive. Voiceovers are well casted, and the music is fitting for each of the different time period you visit. And although the controls are easy to get a hang of at first, they can be a challenge when you get into the heavier platforming sections. Key platforms to land on aren't as obvious as before, so you'll have to keep a sharp eye. Still, I would rank the controls as one of the more easier types for this particular game. I will say it has one of the coolest uses for the Vita's gyroscope functionality. Tilting the Vita to guide a spark through a circuit board, or trying to gather fish is pretty clever, and it works well despite some of the criticism. Also, I wasn't expecting this, but the game has a sense of humor. It's actually funny. There's one scene where I couldn't help but just start laughing. It's great. Overall, it's one of the best games I've ever played. My only regret is that I wish I had played it sooner. If you're curious, there's a demo on the PSN store, but even then, it still doesn't do justice to what the game has to offer. For a fun and spellbinding adventure on the PS Vita, Sly Cooper Thieves in Time can't be beat. Definitely a hidden rupee. Alright guys, I hope you all enjoyed the video. This is where I take a moment to squeeze out a few extra seconds so I can hit that 10-minute mark. As always, please give me a thumbs up, comments and questions below. See you in the next video. Later guys.